These high-stakes standardized tests, and by high stakes I mean there are significant consequences to the results for a school. So these high-stakes standardized tests have actually resulted in a pretty dramatic change in teaching practices in most public schools. Generally, teachers have become more reliant on some of the sort of traditional test preparation strategies that we sort of have a gut reaction we think, is going to be effective. So let's take a look at some of the, these practices that have emerged as a result of the high stakes test imposition and what research says about the efficacy of them. So test preparation will often result in, teachers will have some sort of practice and memorization of information. And teachers will coach children on test taking strategies. And the result is that we do see a lot of sort of rote practice of the particular types of questions that will emerge on a test and memorization of content information. And certainly there are some skills that really rely on some of that just rote practice. If you're going to learn how to dribble a basketball, you need to dribble the basketball again and again and again and again. And the same is true for learning a musical instrument or how to do a cartwheel or any number of skills that you're trying to acquire. Practice is an essential part of that. The same is true for math fact memorization or a few other academic skills. But test taking is not one of those skills that it is important to practice and memorize. Research shows very clearly that rote practice and memorization does not raise students' scores on achievement tests. It just doesn't. And in fact, studies show that at best it has no impact on their achievement if they've done a bunch of rote practice and memorization. And at worst, it can actually have a negative impact on their scores. So that is not a strategy that we want to go to if we're preparing for a standardized test. In a lot of schools, teachers feel like they have to spend weeks prior to the test preparing the children for taking that test and having them practice some of these traditional test-taking strategies. And often some of this work will be giving them workbooks and sheets that are, kind of mimic the actual test so that they practice taking the test to prepare for taking the test. And research has shown that this actually isn't effective either. So there's research that shows that children that focus on more authentic activities that are related to whatever the skill or knowledge that needs to be demonstrated, those authentic activities as test preparation resulted in higher test scores, whereas that traditional practice taking the test so that you're ready for the test activity did not result in higher test scores. So we really need to relate those skills that we're trying to test the children on, we need to relate that preparation to an actual authentic activity that works on those skills, not just another sort of fake one, which is, whatever has been put together on a test. One big result on teachers' classroom practice with the imposition of these high stakes tests is what's called a narrowing of the curriculum. And that means that teachers start to focus their entire classroom practice on what is going to be on the test. They narrow the curriculum to that so that children are only getting information about what they're going to be tested on in these high stakes tests. And it's easy to see why that would be an inclination if your job depends on how well these students score on these tests. You might think that an effective solution to that or a strategy for that is to only teach what the children will be getting on the test. But that narrowing of the curriculum actually has not been shown to raise test scores. In fact, a broader curriculum has been shown to raise test scores. So children who participate in music get higher scores on standardized tests. Children who have more physical education time, like 2 hours a week versus children that have much less, scored higher on standardized achievement tests. So the narrowing of the curriculum is a real danger because it will limit perhaps student achievement. These other areas of a curriculum actually do support student achievement, although it doesn't seem like a direct support to the test, it is. So we have to keep in mind that even if we do have to do these standardized tests, we don't want to fall into some of these traditional sort of traps of narrowing the curriculum or forcing rote memorization or eliminating music and arts and physical education because we want to focus only on what children are going to need to pass the test. Research shows that those are not effective techniques, so we want to be very conscious of that in our classrooms if we are preparing for a standardized test.